Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are now officially at NFL opening week. And to celebrate, we're going to start off by giving my top 5 favorite games and storylines to pay attention to in the upcoming week or so. So to start off, we'll give some honorable mentions as well. I think that that Dallas at Cleveland is a very interesting game, considering the fact that both of these teams have a lot to prove in different ways almost. The Cowboys obviously being the Cowboys, understanding that they have all of these financial deadlines ahead of them with the idea of Dak Prescott's contract extension as well as Micah Parsons, Mike McCarthy being on the hot seat. How will they respond this upcoming year? And I think it's a very tough matchup for them at Cleveland, where Browns still have one of the best defenses in the NFL. We'll talk about, Deshaun Watson and what he looks like in what should still be a good defense now without Deron Bland for the first couple months of the season. So definitely a little bit of a different look Cowboys team, but still should be overall a good defense now coached by Mike Zimmer, which I actually think could be an upgrade over Dan Quinn. So this is a game that I'm definitely looking forward to. I feel like all the public money is probably going to be on the Cowboys, but don't sleep on the Browns either, because that is a very tough football team. And the other honorable mention, a little playoff rematch from last night. Matt Stafford going back to Ford Stadium in Detroit to try and avenge the playoff loss. This is one that initially I had higher on my list, but the reason why I bumped it down, I think entertainment-wise it should definitely be there, and the Rams are going to come ready to play. But I do have my concerns with the Rams this upcoming season, that I think that they could see a little bit of a drop-off from last year, whether we're talking about the health status of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp as well, that this is overall a team that, is sort of hanging on by a thread a little bit, trying to balance all of the up-and-coming defensive players while also relying a lot on some older offensive skill position players that have, accumulated some injuries over the past few years. So, again, a couple honorable mentions there. But number 5, I have the Houston Texans versus the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a game that I think could fly very much under the radar for a lot of casual NFL fans. And I don't know where I stand entirely on the overall hype level for Anthony Richardson and the Colts. I don't think it's going to be quite as smooth as everybody anticipates, but that being said, there are 100% going to be flashes this season from Anthony Richardson. And last year, if I'm not mistaken, I think Anthony Richardson actually won his start against the Texans early on last year. One of his few games that he played that he looked good. And this is a Colts team playing at home against a division rival. I think it's going to be a lot tougher than people are anticipating, especially when you talk about the, public perception between these two teams. The Colts were, playing the Texans for that final playoff spot in Week 17 last year. And yes, there's been a ton of improvements and roster moves from the Texans that make things interesting in terms of, how serious of contenders are they? I do think pretty serious, but that being said, the Colts are not a team to overlook. I think that the Anthony Richardson storyline is very compelling, and watching him specifically go up against CJ Stroud, I think this can be a closer game than people are expecting going into it. But that is my number 5. Number 4, I have the Jaguars versus the Dolphins. Here at the GSMC Podcast Network, there's this whole sort of, mini debate going on between Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa. Either way, both of these quarterbacks getting massive contract extensions during the offseason, and a lot of doubters for both of them as to whether or not they are worth the money that they were just paid. Now, my take on that would be, I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to pan out. I have some more hesitations with Tua, but that being said, neither one of them have totally proven that they are worth quite the extent of money that they got, over $50 million a year. Both very promising players, but one playoff win combined between the two of them so far. Still early on. Wins are not a quarterback stat, so, I will sort of hedge myself there. But that being said, until we really see these guys step up in some big moments and put some consistency together is really the big thing for me, especially on the Trevor Lawrence front, where we've seen these flashes of greatness and top-end talent that made him the number 1 overall draft pick, but we haven't seen him be able to string it for, an entire season. Both of the past couple years have seen really high highs and really low lows, even, within the same exact game for Lawrence. If you look back to that Chargers win in the 2022 season. But ultimately, I think that this should be a good matchup between two teams that are sort of knocking on the door of being taken seriously, but haven't fully won over that respect just yet. So I do have this as a very interesting game in terms of, these two teams and these two quarterbacks solidifying their place in the overall hierarchy of the NFL. Number 3, I have the Packers versus the Eagles. Should be a very fun matchup between two of the top teams in the NFC. I will say, I think I dinged it a little bit because of the fact that this game is in Brazil, which is, I don't have all that much of a problem with it. It's a little bit weird, but also the NFL is trying to grow. That being said, though, we have the conversation with the London game every year that it does have an impact on the travel schedule and the body clocks of these players, that almost it feels like there's going to inherently be a built-in excuse for whichever team loses, I should say. So, I dinged it a little bit there, but these are two teams that could very easily be facing off in the NFC Championship game if things break right for them this upcoming year. You have Jordan Love coming off of a new contract extension. This idea of, was it a little bit of a fluke run at the end of last year, or is this really who they're rearing into being? Meanwhile, the Eagles had a little bit of an identity crisis by the end of last year, falling apart, having all of the offseason, stories about the relationship between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts and the dysfunction that occurred behind the scenes, but this is still a very talented team, two very talented teams, maybe on a little bit of different timelines here, but ultimately both with the same hope of coming out of the NFC. So I think it could be a very interesting game. Number 2, the New York Jets versus the San Francisco 49ers. Now, if I was going to, rank these just based off of how competitive I think the games will be, this might not have made it. I think the 49ers are still really good. I hear all the red flags and concerns about them having a Super Bowl losing hangover. If it happens, I can't say it would be the most shocking thing in the world, but in my eyes, this team has too much talent not to be great once again and be one of the top competitors. I think that, next year is when we're looking at the real implications of where they're at financially, that we could see a significant shakeup to their overall roster construction, but they're running it back this year with primarily the same group that they had last season that took them to the Super Bowl. A couple marginal pieces here and then out. Injuries, it's obviously not a great sign that Greenlaw is dealing with this torn Achilles, but they're also getting Talanoa Hufanga back in the secondary as well to sort of offset that to some degree. The reason this game is number 2, though, is because of the fact that we're going to see Aaron Rodgers hopefully play a full game for the New York Jets, and this has been one of the biggest NFL storylines over the past couple seasons, and it feels like, last year was just so anticlimactic, him going down at the very beginning of the year, that, the media and such was just sort of forcing this storyline of Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. Are they Super Bowl contenders now? Just sort of shoving it down our throats and then having it not even really be a discussion after 3 plays. So we're sort of back on that train again. I'm not confident in the Jets. I don't know if I can really buy into a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers coming off of a torn Achilles of, returning to form, even though the last time we saw him, he was already starting to decline. So it's on the table that, Rodgers just needs to be an upgrade at that quarterback position for the Jets to make the playoffs. But, I think just the real official debut of Rodgers in a Jets jersey, that alone does it for me. Kind of messed up of the NFL to put Rodgers' debut once again on Monday Night Football, considering how last year went. But at the end of the day, should be interesting to keep an eye on. And then the number one biggest game to watch, in every essence, it is the Ravens versus the Chiefs on Thursday Night Football, this upcoming week to kick off the season. This is a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game that did go down to the wire. Now, I think that we're going to get maybe some different versions of this team, maybe a little bit more competence on the offensive side for both of them. The defenses, both losing some key contributors. You look at L'Jarius Sneed for the Chiefs, now in Tennessee. Patrick Queen for the Ravens, now in Pittsburgh. So I expect there to be a little bit more offense in this game. We'll see about that, but ultimately, this game has, once again, the potential to be another AFC Championship matchup of the future. Lamar Jackson, I am hoping for his sake for him to have a bounce-back season. I think he was incredible all of last year, and part of it was him, 100% in that championship game. Part of it was also on the coaches, I thought, for abandoning the run game and going from the number one rushing offense in the league last year by a significant margin to sort of, abandoning that in the biggest moment of the season. I thought that was a crazy move, especially because that was sort of the biggest weakness on the Chiefs defense, but I digress there. I think this should be an excellent way to kick off the season. Really looking forward to it, and ultimately, I think that this is a matchup between two of the best teams in the NFL. This is all we've been wanting these past handful of months, and it's finally coming to us just a couple days from now. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section on any of these games, or maybe some other games that you think are also flying under the radar. But we are now going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, gonna be sharing my thoughts on Russell Wilson being named the starting quarterback and captain for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Talk about the expectations for him and the team as a whole moving forward this season. But first, this quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.